Okay, so I think we'll start. So for the folk that have just wandered in the last couple of minutes, what I mentioned before is that link at the bottom of this page has got a link to all the resources for this: PowerPoints, speaking notes, cheat sheets, walkthrough, everything that you want to go back to the office and be a hero. I don't know, maybe not a hero, but whatever. Okay, so welcome to building your RAG application with PromptFlow and Azure Studio. Can I have a quick show of hands? How many folk here came along to the workshop this morning that we ran? So there's about 20 to 30% of you came along to that. Keep it, just bear with it. Some of the intro slides will look very similar, and the reason for that is that they are the same, but it's only for the first 5 or so minutes. So just keep that in mind. So my goal for this session is you should be able to walk away understanding how you can go and build a large language model application using PromptFlow and AI Studio. Now, the other thing about this session is that this is part one of a two-part series. So I think it's actually in this room, but I think it is. It's Breakout 411. And I would recommend going along to that session after this session because it'll kind of add in. So the focus of the second session, or the second part, is much more on evaluation of model performance. And that is super important. And out of that, we decided it was really a session in its own right because everyone needs to care about it. Okay, I've already mentioned everything's open source, slides, code, demo notes, all there for you to go to. Okay, so a taste of what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to introduce you to large language model ops. I seem to have trouble saying LLM ops, I managed at that time, and LLM processes. We're going to dive into touch a little bit about AI Studio. We'll come back to AI Studio at the back of the demo. And we're going to talk about PromptFlow. In this, we're going to build a RAG-style application. Now, folks here, I asked this morning, how many people here are familiar with RAG-style pattern applications? Okay, so we're up at actually about 40%, 50%. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. Hopefully, at the end of that, you will understand what a RAG pattern application is, and then when someone says, let's build a RAG pattern, you'll better nod or knowingly. And we're going to touch on quality testing of a large language model application. And we're just going to touch on that and give you a flavor of what you can do with that. Okay, so I do apologize to the folk that have been to the workshop because you will see this slide. But as you can imagine, over the last couple of years, Microsoft and working with our customers, we have learned a lot of lessons. And there was a lot of challenges. No doubt if you're trying to playing around with these ideas, there are a lot of challenges in this process of bringing a high quality app to your customers or internal use. And we've kind of identified these three phases. We've got ideation, we've got building, and we've got operationalizing. I knew I was going to trip over that, and I did. Okay, so we look at ideation. That's all about trying to figure out the models that make sense for your scenario. It's around experimenting with prompts and getting those to behave in the right way. Does that meet the hypothesis that you're thinking that you can solve this business issue? It's kind of that phase. And then we think about the kind of the building phase, and that's much more about, okay, what are the data sources of my organization? Let's get a bit more serious about prompt engineering. Let's start to think about the quality evaluation of that. And then of course is pushing it into production. Maybe I just should push it into production. And we've got things like monitoring, we worry about costs, we worry about quality, we worry about is the quality of the response that I'm getting from a prompt, is that drifting? Maybe you're using a different model, a different version of the model, maybe that behavior, that application is starting to change. So those are the kinds of things. And kind of drilling down into this in a little bit more detail, of course you need to come up with a cunning business plan or a cunning idea that meets a real problem with the organization. You don't want this to be a science experiment. The other challenge, of course, is getting at access to data. Now, the big part that you'll hear about people talk about when they talk about RAG or fine-tuning, it's about grounding prompts in truth or in data. So you'll hear conversations like bring your own data and things like that. So you need to have ready access to the data within your organization that you're going to be using inside your application to provide ground truth for the application. So getting the data, getting it at the right granularity, making it searchable, all those types of things you need to worry about. And then finally to go and develop it. Now the other thing, and this is probably true for all styles of applications, but I think particularly true for LLM-based apps, is it's a highly iterative process. So you're going to go through this thing and you think you got it right, and you've done some quality testing, and suddenly this application starts hallucinating or something like that and providing random stuff. You think, hang on, but I thought I had everything covered, and still the issues. And so that's what you find. It's a highly iterative process. You need to go through this. Typically what you want to do is start off small with small data sets, get that working, and then migrate to bigger data sets inside your organization. And then when you migrate to bigger data sets, then you start having to worry about things like the granularity of that data. Particularly when it comes to search. You want to make sure if I go and ask a question, I'm getting the relevant chunk of data back. And you need to think about, I almost think about granularity of data is starting with the end in mind. What do you want the end user response to be? And then that kind of work backwards to things like chunking up your data and stuff like that. So I tend to start thinking about what's going to be the end user experience and then roll that back to how you need to massage your data to make it make sense. Okay, and then I can't overemphasize this, and I've kind of touched on this, evaluate, evaluate, evaluate. And then when you've done evaluation, do some more. And what we're doing is we're trying to put in tools in place to make that easier. And I should point out that the whole evaluation space is absolutely ongoing, and ongoing research. So we've got some pretty neat ideas. It's not perfect, but it does get us a long way down the line of automating a lot of things like quality around the models that come out. And then, of course, pushing the applications into production. You want to understand how that model's performing, costs, alerts, maybe the system's gone down, scaling that up, scaling that endpoint and things like that. So, and obviously integrating it into some sort of application that someone's going to be using. So that's fundamentally what we're trying to do. Now, so in support of that kind of MLOps, we are introducing I'm going to talk about two things we're introducing because the reality is a lot's going on. We've got AI Studio. So AI Studio is becoming the center of gravity for really all the things that we're doing for AI on Azure. And you'll see at the moment it's a slightly painful process because you've got bits in different portals, but it's very much with a center of gravity. So if you go to ai.azure.com, that'll take you to where a lot of the activity is going on. So the other thing that we're focused on is tooling. So we have talked about the LLM ops, and that we're doing around platform support, library support, tooling support, and trying to implement best practices for that, so that when you come along, you're learning from all the pain points that we've had implementing co-pilots or working with customers or trying to be doing those types of things. So AI Studio provides access to thousands of models out there. You can get to OpenAI, you can get to Llama. There's a whole stack of open source models that you have access to via that portal. We provide tools there for grounding your prompts with data. So no doubt you've been to various talks. We look at in the portal, in the playground, and things like that where you can go and ground your prompts then. We have built-in safety, responsible AI, monitoring of your applications, playgrounds to try things, etc. Okay, so the other thing that we're doing in support of this whole life cycle of envisaging the idea to all the way through to deployment and production is this is where prompt flow comes in. Now, you're going to see when I demonstrate this, and you'll think, oh, prompt flow is just the tools that he's showing. It's not. It's about this whole life cycle and providing tooling out there to make that. And you can almost think of prompt flow is low code, and some of you might be sending a shiver down your spine. It's low code but extensible. So what we're trying to do is put in what we call tools that are kind of everyone's going to use. So you don't want to go back and reinvent the wheel because everyone's going to do embeddings, or everyone wants to go and call a model or things like that. So we're putting in common tools that almost everyone's going to use, but it's highly extensible. So you can say, okay, I need to go and do this. It's special to my application. I need to go and do that. So basically, prompt flow will give you a place to go, and it manages your overall execution, linking your prompts, your tools, your models, all those types of things. It gives you debugging, so you can step into the pieces of code, understand what's going on. You can create your prompts and look at variants, and then test it to find, okay, that's interesting. This prompt and this grounding of data is giving me better results than maybe different combinations and permutations that I might have been using. And you can also take that all the way through to testing. You can locally test it, and then you can obviously deploy that to the cloud, run that, push it up to the cloud, and then enable monitoring and scale that deployment as you need to. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about in a bit more detail is this thing called RAG, or this is the Retrieval Augmented Generation. So fundamentally, what this is about is grounding a prompt or grounding your application in your data. Now, despite common misperceptions, conceptions, GPT-3 or GPT-4 does not know everything in the world. It does not know about your internal corporate data. It probably doesn't know in detail about your products and things like that. And fundamentally, this is about what you're trying to do. Now, there are two ways in which you can, essentially two ways in which you can provide context to prompts and queries that people might want to do against your application. So the first approach is what's called fine tuning. And fine tuning is you basically look at what's called a foundational model. You say, okay, that foundational model does most of what I want to do, but I want to put another layer of my data on top of that. And it can be a very valid approach. That said, it typically is more expensive, time consuming, and if your data is particularly changeable, if it's fine if your data is static, but if you've got data that's changing a lot, not so fine. It's a lot more skill required. And you might say, oh, I've got the skills, great. So the other approach that people take is this thing called RAG. And then RAG is about a person puts on a question, you go and look up the data, which here, so in this case, a person puts on the question, you kind of look aside and you go and grab data which is relevant to that question. You grab that data, and then what happens is you return that back and you augment the prompt with that data. So you've now got this meta prompt, which has kind of got all the context of your products, your customer order history, whatever it might be. It's now in that. And then what you're doing is you're going to generate a response and then send it back to the end user. So that's fundamentally what's going on with RAG style or RAG pattern applications. You're going and grabbing some context, some grounding data, pulling that into the prompt, and then sending that through the model. Now, the other thing I should point out is this looks wonderful, and when Dave's got a slide like this, but the reality is it's way more complicated than that. And when you go back and start building out these things, you'll start realizing there are a lot of nuances in this. You might want to call lots of different models, for example. You might want to chain models together. You might want to do prompt rewriting, or lots of different things that are coming in. So very highly stylized, highly idealized, but there's a lot more that likely you'll need to deal with. To give you an example, you might, and I'm going to show you in a moment, a chat style application. You might have to deal with things like customer intent. Why have they come to my website and they want to chat with me? Have they come in here for support? Have they come in to find out product information? All those types of things. And then you need to understand what that customer's asking, because then you obviously need to divert and get different data sets, respond differently, understand I've got a really grumpy customer here, and I'm going to hand over to a human. Things like that you need to be dealing with inside these models. So this is a highly stylized example of how this all hangs together. Okay, one other thing that I want to touch upon this is, and this has come up a couple of times, inside prompt flow there is an orchestration engine. And we get a lot of people saying, okay, well, what about LangChain or semantic kernel? We've got orchestration engines of those. So I can't overemphasize that prompt flow is about this whole end-to-end, from building, testing, to deploying. There is nothing to stop you using LangChain or semantic kernel or whatever works for you inside what we call tools. You build a custom tool, it might be doing a whole lot of chaining of different models and things like that. So they're not the same. You think about LangChain and semantic kernel their libraries or their frameworks, which you might use and as part of your prompt. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about is how you should view the types of use cases and types of things that you're looking to build within your organization. And what I would do is encourage you to look through the lens of risk. So think about your use case or your business scenario and think about it through, okay, is this a high risk scenario? And I kind of give you an example. If you're dealing with patient diagnostics, what you typically want to do is you want to collaborate with AI. You do not want this patient coming in, going through this AI and all this magic that you're putting in place, and then suddenly saying, this is what the diagnosis is, and you're going to, I don't know, whatever it is. And so typically you want to collaborate with a specialist. The same thing if you're making high economic impact decisions. Again, you would want to be able to collaborate with that person, with a specialist, and then provide them the tools and information they want to do. That said, there are a lot of low-risk scenarios that you're likely to be thinking about inside your businesses. Customer support would be an example of where you can probably provide a lot of customer support and it's relatively low risk. You can figure out if they're getting frustrated, then you can hand them off to a human. Things like information retrieval. I want to go to your site and find about product information and stuff like that. Content generation. I love the concept around education. So you can imagine you can go and build out, you've got, for education scenarios, you know the course curriculum, you know how a student is performing, you know the results from their last tests. You can pull all that information together and start tailoring an education experience based on when you know the student needs more support to help them bring up them up to speed. So those are kind of things. So I would encourage you to think about the risk level, high risk, low risk, and then think within that, collaborate or automate is kind of the main message. What I want to do, and you've probably seen this demo multiple times by now. So this is a Contoso site. All the code is available for this. And you can come along and I can say, this is just a typical chat, and this is talking to a service that we've already deployed that was built with Chatflow, and it could be something like, what tent can you recommend for a beginner? And I got that most of the way without too many typos, which actually doesn't really matter. We're talking to a language model, we're just going to understand what I'm doing. Okay, so this is going to talk to that endpoint which has been out there deployed, and it's come back and said, hey, Sarah Lee, you can tell this demo was put together by an American, and you'll say, for a beginner like you, I'd recommend Skyview, and etc. Okay, so that's the kind of thing you can go and build it here, and you can see that in this case, I'm actually logged in. We'll just shut that down, and you can see that I authenticated as Sarah Lee, so it knows my context. It's going to grab data, looked at my order history past, it's looked up the product information, got information about tents and things like that, and we're good to go. Oh, right, the next thing. So we're going to go into demo land now, and we're going to talk about ideation and exploring with prompt flow. So the first thing about prompt flow, and this is more the prompt flow extension for Visual Studio Code, is that there are two experiences. There's what we call a code first experience, and this is just a YAML document which you can go and manipulate yourself, or in the future you might be going building your own tooling, for example, which could go and update this YAML. You could go and automate a pipeline, a CI/CD pipeline, and maybe you might go and update that flow and automate that in part of your testing. So those are kinds of things. The beauty of having it code first is you can go and check it into source control, you've got versioning, easy to collaborate, all those types of things. But you've also got this designer view, and most of us will probably gravitate to the designer view to work with that. Okay, so the next thing I want to, he said without losing his voice. Now, before I go too much into this, I just want to talk about something called, what we call AI search and what we call hybrid and vector-based searching. Now, almost all RAG-based applications, at some point, you're probably going to want to do something called vector-based search. Now, the beauty of vector-based search is it has semantic properties. So you can ask a question, and that gets, you send that off to an embedding engine, and that embedding engine, and the one that typically people are using at the moment would be something called text embedding ADA-002. There is a new embedding model just come out, and it will give you back a vector. And that will be 1 by 1536 floating point numbers. And that vector is a semantic or intent-based representation of that question. And then you can go and apply that against a vector database, and it will do semantic search. It's something we call nearest neighbor, and I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of that, but that's kind of what's going on. So the way this works is that you need to take your data set. Let's say you've got some data living in SQL, or maybe you've got some documents that are sitting in a folder, and you want to ingest those into your application. So the first thing you need to do is you need to take that content and vectorize it. Now, most scenarios are probably going to be around text. And in this case, you're going to be using a text embedding engine. That's going to give you back a vector. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put both the product description as well as the embedding that we got back from the embedding model into a search index. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Then the user comes along and they merely say, okay, so the question is, I need a warm, waterproof shoes to go on a hike. So that's the question that the end user is asked. So the first thing you need to go and do is you need to get an embedding for that question. So you go off to the same version model that you used to create the embeddings that you put into the index, and that's super important. If you've invested in text embedding ADA-002, then your question needs to be using the same embedding model. Okay, so you've come along and you've done that, and you now send that off, in this case, to Azure AI Search. And Azure AI Search supports what we call hybrid search. So it does keyword-based search as well as semantic search. And it basically unions the result of that, and you hope you'll get back the best results of that. So it's a way that we found you get highly accurate results. So you get both semantic search, what was the intent of that, as well as a keyword. And that helps that pick up and gives you really good results that come back. And then ultimately that's going to give you back the results. So almost always you're going to want this, some sort of vector database sitting in the back end of your application. Now, Azure AI Search is not the only vector store out there. There are, I think I was looking yesterday, there are about 20 of them. There's Redis, Weaviator, Pinecone, the ones that kind of spring to my mind. So I'm not saying you have to use AI Search, but just be aware that it's there. Okay, so we're going to get to demo land. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break this demo down into RAG, R for RAG. So the first part of this is going to be about retrieval. Then we're going to talk about augmentation and the final generative. And it's pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is we're going to jump across to VS Code. And I'm going to show you the world's simplest hello world. And what we're going to do is I'm going to create a folder in here called glove boxes. And if you go and find me on GitHub or you find me on LinkedIn, I am glove boxes. So that's the easy way. My name's Dave Glover, and I always make sure I grab glove boxes. Okay, I know the font's a bit small, but what I'm clicked on here is new flow in the directory. And I'm going to create a chat flow. And then what this will do is it'll go and build out the YAML. And if you go and look in here, you see I've got inputs, I've got outputs. I know it's not particularly easy to see, it's a bit small. But up the top here, I've got Visual Editor. And you'll see what you do is you get a graph of this. And if you look really closely, you'll see that there's an alert sign on there. And if I go and click on that, you'll see that in here, I need to go and select the model. So I go and select the connection. So this is a connection I've got back into Azure. And the other thing I need to go and do is I need to go and set a question. And in this question, I'm going to say, you'll see there's a real, what tent would you recommend for beginners? Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this prompt click on standard, and this will now go and talk off to GPT 3.5, and it will come back with a result. And I go and click on outputs, I'll jump that over here, and if I just make this a little bit bigger, you'll see it's come back. For the question was, what temp would you recommend? And it's come back with a super generic answer. This is just what ChatGPT 3.5, when it was trained, it saw something about tense. And it's going to, so this is just a generic, it knows nothing about my organization's content. Okay, so you've seen that, so that's a super easy way. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you one very simple example. If I go Command N, or in fact, if I go over here, click on prompts, what you'll see is that there are multiple ways in good Microsoft style to do the same thing. So you can come over here, you can see what are called tools. You can get these tools and drag and drop them onto your design surface. You've got your connections, so down here, these are the connections that I've set up to Azure AI for the models that I'm going to be using inside this. But I'm going to do this a super easy way and just go Windows, so Control or Command if you're on Mac. And we will go to New. And in here, you'll see that I've got a selection of tools. I want to go and do an embedding. So we've added the embedding. I'm just going to go for the default name. We'll just move this around. What you'll find is that the UI is a little bit bouncy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect that model, that embedding. So I'm going to connect it to a connection I've got back. The deployment name is going to be this thing called Text Embedding Ada. And the input for this is going to be input questions. Okay, so you see up there, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this whole thing. Click on that, run it in standard mode. And what we'll see when it comes back, if I go and click on the embeddings, and we'll look at the output from embeddings, and you'll see, surprise, surprise, there's the 1 by 1536 floating point number, semantic representation of that question, which I'm then going to push against the database. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is we're going to jump across to Azure. And just so you get a bit of a sense of where this data is coming from. So in Azure, I've loaded up, and if you go and play and deploy this yourself, this is all I've done, nothing magic. So I've got Cosmos DB in there, which is a JSON-based document database. And you can see, let me just make this a little bit larger. Okay, so you can see, not too large that I completely lose my way. You can see I've selected customer 7, and all I've done is that, as I went and put my name and did an update. So you can see it's got who I am as a customer, and then you can see I've got my orders. This is just my previous order history sitting in there. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go into the search index. So what I've taken is a product set of some product date documents I had, and I've uploaded them into Azure AI search. So I've just pre-done that, and you'll see that it's got a very modest number of documents. It's got 20 documents on there. I can go into this index, and I'll go say tent for beginners. And we'll search that. And what this is going to do, it's going to do a keyword-based search. If I scroll down there, you will see that is the vector for the product description. Okay, so that's how those numbers are got on there. So just so you know, when I go through this data, where's he getting that data from? It's coming from Cosmos DB and a search index that I've loaded up already. Okay, so what we're going to do is go back to my cheat sheet, and we'll go through here and make sure I don't forget to do that. Okay, so we'll go to my cheat sheet, copy that over, and we'll go back to Visual Studio Code, and we'll go into Glovebox here, and I'm just going to replace that, save it away, and we'll go back into the Visual Editor. When you're doing this, I did describe the UI as something a mother could love, only love. So you can fiddle around this, and you can get it into kind of fit. So what we've got is a flow, and you can see I've got my input, and if I go and look at my input over here, It says recommended tint for beginners, because the data set is quite small. And I'm going to send that to the embedding. So I'm going to get an ADA, or text embedding ADA, get that 1 by 1536. I'm going to send that to go to AI search to get the documents. Remember I said that AI search is a hybrid engine. It's going to I want the keywords, so I want the recommended tint, I want that text plus the embedding, and I'm going to get the result back from that. And then I'm going to do a customer lookup, and that customer lookup is going to grab some data from Cosmos DB. Now, if you can see that, you'll notice that these things are called tools. And you can see that they do have links on them. So if I go and click on that link, you'll see that takes me into kind of a snippet or bit of Python. Now, it is Python at the moment. And you can see, okay, well, here's and you basically annotate a function with @tool, and then this is the bit of code that goes off and calls and grabs the data out of Cosmos. Pretty straightforward, super easy to go and implement, and you can see I can debug. So we're going to come across here, and again, what I'm going to do, instead of hitting run, I'm going to hit debug, or actually I just say F5, I think. So we'll fire that off. And what that's doing is it's going to fire this application up, and voila, we've hit the breakpoint. So you can now start debugging the custom tools that you need to go and talk to the unique sets of data sources that you will have inside your organization. And then, of course, in good Visual Studio Code way, you can start stepping through connect, and we'll run that, and then we've got back the data. So if I now go and flick across over to my graph, if I go and look at outputs, as I said, the UI tends to bounce around a little bit. This is the data that's come back from Cosmos as well as AI search index. So you can see I've now got my order history. So remember when I was in Cosmos, I showed you I'd updated it to Dave Glover. And you can see here goes my previous orders. And if I scroll down a bit further, you can see this is the relevant product information that I've grabbed out of AI search that I'm going to basically augment my prompt with. Okay, so that's where my data sources have come back. And it's just basically a JSON document. You can imagine it's just push that together. Right, okay, so that's what's come back from those data sources. Okay, next thing we're going to do, we're going to pop across to the next part. Actually, there was something I did want to show, and I knew I'd forget. We'll come over to here, and we'll go and select output. The other really neat thing, and we'll just make this a bit bigger so it's easy for everyone to see, we'll go and click on the flow, and then what you can see is what was the time, how does this model start to perform? What are the things that have taken a long time in this overall process? And the reason that the retrieval document is so much time, anyone want to guess why that took so long? Sorry? Yes, I put a breakpoint in there. So, and I was talking about the breakpoint, of course, I was probably yabbering away for 15 seconds. And that's why it took 18 seconds to go and get out the data. And it's super useful to understand. And you can see that some parts of those tools, it's concurrent. So where it can, the model, the flow will say, okay, well, I can do this in parallel to this execution. So that's the kind of thing you get with that. Yeah, the first time I think, why on earth is that going so slow? And then, of course, I realized I was debugging. I'm sure I'm not the only person to have done that. Okay, so we'll jump back to the notes. And, okay, we've done the RAG bit. Okay, the next part, we're going to do the augmentation. So we're going to come across here. As I said, I want to make this super easy for you and super easy for me. Okay, so we're going to go across to the, we'll go back to the designer. You click on this tool and we'll say fit. And the other really neat thing you can do with this tool, and I often do this, the other thing I'd recommend when you're playing around with this is to use a wide screen if you can. But you can go and put this into toggle the orientation for this. And actually, that can be quite nice. You can get a horizontal view. Just depends if you want a wide screen. I actually found this was to be better way to work on it. But we'll jump back to horizontal because actually it gets to work slightly better in this scenario. Okay, so we've talked about embeddings, we've got our data, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to augment our prompt. And you can see down here we've got customer prompt, and again we'll see on a link on this. Now the way this works is this uses something called Ginger. So I don't know if anyone's played around with Python. Ginger is a really popular templating library. And that's what's going on here. So basically I've got a template which is going to be like my meta prompt or my Uber prompt, or whatever you want to go and call it. This is the thing that ultimately is going to be sent off to the LLM. So we've got task, and it says I'm sure you played around with this, don't think you are an agent. With LLMs, the idea is you want to be specific as you can. So you're an AI agent, can also outdoors. You can talk about safety, super useful. Go check out these for really cool ideas. You should always refer to factual information. Do not start randomly grabbing data from previously trained models. There was another one which I really liked in here. When in disagreement, stop replying and end the conversation. Super useful things in there you can learn about prompt engineering. Now the next thing, what we're going to do is we're going to roll in the data that we got back from our data sources. So the documentation is going to be from our, so our documentation is going to be from our product catalog. So remember I put in tents, it's going to get stuff about tents for me. And all this is doing is going to loop through all of the JSON documents that were relevant for my search. And it's going to fold those in to the template and then return that. And you can see down here exactly the same idea for previous orders. Is just going to roll through the previous orders and fold that in and produce that. And you can see down here, customer context, there goes my first name. You saw it's going to be Dave Glover, age, etc. So all it's going to do is create me a prompt based on this template, including previous chat history. So it's called Ginger. It's a really, really popular templating library for Python. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're now going to run this whole flow. So run this away, run it in standard mode, and that'll go off, talk to the embedding, grab the data, and we'll go and look at outputs. And over here, I'll just move this a little bit over here, go and look in the output temp, and we'll see up here, not particularly readable. This was my recommend tent for beginners, that was my original question, and then the context that I'm going to be passing into an LLM, chat GPT 3.5 in this case, this is all the context I'm going to be passing in. Okay, so that's where it's coming from, and you can see, again, I can look at the flow. Okay, so the next step I'm going to be doing is, so that was the A in augmentation. Okay, the next part I'm going to come down through here and I'm going to look at the G and generative AI. So we're going to grab that, and what I always recommend you do is close the visual editor. If you're wondering why does he keep doing that, do that because you'll find it gets a bit confused. So close that visual designer, then go back into the editor, and then go back and zoom and get everything to fit. And as you can see, it is sometimes a bit tiresome. Okay, so now we've got our meta prompt, and then we're going to push that into, we're going to send this now to GPT 3.5, we're going to get the output. And we're going to run that, run it in standard mode, and we will get the output from that. And that comes back, look at the output, and we will jump over here, and we can see, there goes a response. I'm not going to spend too much time, but this is a response which you would then feed back into your user interface that you're building for your application. Now, just as a really quick one, because I'm a little bit behind, you can go and deploy that locally. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is evaluation. So we'll jump back to the slides. Come back through here, move around. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is evaluation. So there are a number of metrics that you'll be wanting to do. I said the next session is going to major out on this. But things you want to worry about, you want to be able to test, are things like the groundedness of your application. How well is it grounded its response back to you? The relevance, did it bring back information that was useful? Coherency, was it kind of suitable language that you wanted to use it? And what you can do is you can go back, and there is now, I'm going to show you the evaluation. So jump into evaluation, and we're going to load up this notebook. Now again, almost certainly when you kind of got a bit further down the line of this, is that you would probably automate around this, and this would be part of your quality assurance, CI/CD pipelines. Did it pass a certain threshold? Yes, it did. Let's roll that endpoint into production. That's the kind of thing where you probably do behind this. So I'm just going to come up here, clear the output. We'll just run through this notebook a couple of times. So we're just loading up some libraries. And what this is going to do, this first step is going to call Contoso workflow, the chat. And that is just the same one I just showed you building it. So this is going to send you, can you tell me about your jackets? Okay, so that's going to call a flow, and we're going to get the results back from that. And then we'll look at that, and there goes, hey, Dave Glover, let's talk about jackets. Okay, cool. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call a flow called groundedness. And what I'm going to do is take that response, and then I'm going to use GPT version 4 to look at the groundedness. Look at, was that response valid, relative? And it's kind of, there has a system for grounding it. And if I come across into the demo, and I go and look in groundedness, we'll come over here, and we'll go into the visual editor, and we'll just minimize that. And what this is going to do is that this is going to see we've got that groundedness in here, and this is going to call GPT version 4, and we're going to use another Ginger template. And then what this is going to do is this uses few shot examples. So what we're going to tell GPT-4 is that these are examples of good and bad, and it's going to basically tell it that I want you to rate how well GPT-3 responded back to the question. And you'll see in here, the answer there goes, you can say this is a 5, it's false, this is the 1. And if you come down here, what we're doing is what's called few shots. So we're just giving it examples of good and bad. This is the context, this is how the model responded. And down through here, this was the answer. So this was the answer. You can see up here it said the Oscars are in here, and it was annually, but the response came back every 2 years. Well, we know that's annually, we were just told as 1, so that's a 1. Okay, so you get the idea. The Academy Awards here, Oscars, blah, blah, blah. And you look at the answer. Oscars are very important. Yep, that's considered to be a 5. So basically you're teaching the model, GPT, this is good, this is bad, this is in between. Okay, so that's how this is working. So we'll come back over here, and we'll go back to our notebook, and we'll run that, and this is going to call GPT version 4, pass the results from that Turbo 3.5 model, that flow that I ran, and it's going to rank it, and it's probably done it by now, and it's come back, this is amazing, I did not expect that, it came back with 5. So it's come back with that, and it's told me what's going on. And the same thing is going to be around evaluation. I'm joking, I was expecting that to be 5. And the next one is you can do multiple contexts. You can go and look at this and figure out what's going on, and you can go and look at a whole range of those things going on. Now, what I've also done is I'm just going to pop across to my browser and go and look at this inside what we call AI Studio. Remember I said it's a center of gravity for everything. And in here, we've got the deployment. So I've previously deployed that flow into Azure, and I've set it up in containers, and I've set the scalability. So I can come along now into AI Studio, and we'll load that up. And hopefully it's not going to take too long. And what this is going to do, this is going to take me into an area where I can start testing it. I can start looking at alerts. I can start looking at monitoring its performance. Yay. So we've got that up. So there goes the endpoint. So I've basically taken that flow, bundled it up, and pushed it up into Azure. And then we can come along and test. And I'm not going to go through the test, but you can bet your bottom dollar that's find me the best tech for beginners. You can go and look at monitoring. Now I've set up evaluation server side, and you can see I've made a few responses. But you can look in here, I've done one set of monitoring, and I've looked at the groundedness. And I know it's just one data point, and you can have multiple data points in there. But you can start looking at how that model's performing. Is it drifting? You've changed the model. What are you doing out there? That's what you can do inside Azure AI Studio. Okay, so most of the time behind that. Right, okay, we've done the demo and we've been through that. We talked about LLM Ops, tooling, AI Studio, and the tooling I showed you around prompt flow, what we're doing in place for that. Take a photo of that. That is the QR code which will take you to all the source code. It's not the same as my demo notes. So this is the same source code. Grab a photo of that. And the next slide here, I think I've got, if you want to join with me, feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. I don't know, ask me questions. And that link there has got all the speaker notes, the demo notes, the cheat sheet, everything I showed you that you've seen, that's got that link in it. Okay, so get started up on skilling. So be sure to check out aka.ms learn at tour. I can promise you it is actually no, I don't think it is case sensitive. So learn at tour. And if you're not part of the Discord, please get on the Discord. You will see that we continue the conversation on there. I will also link to the repo that I've got sitting on the chat notes, all that stuff that I had in. I will put it on the repo. As I mentioned at the beginning, this session was part one of a 2-part session. So you're interested in evaluation and diving into that a lot more, please hang around for that. Super interesting. That's the whole thing. I think it's kind of like, I've done all this, now I want to make sure that my application is performing like it is, it's high quality over time, and that's what that session is going to be about. So do to check that, and do come along to a workshop. We didn't do that this morning. Come along to the workshop this afternoon. That's at 4 p.m. and the part 2 of this session kicks off at 4:30. Alrighty, thank you so much for coming along. Appreciate that. I know it's a big chunk of your day, so thank you very much. Thank you. Feel free to come up and ask me. Feel free to come up and ask any questions. Thank you. Hi. 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 Nice to meet you. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Sure. Thank you. There's a lot of work into that. I wrote all those demos. I'm going to share them because it took forever to go right up to them. Okay, thank you very much.
How are you? Good. Very unwise.
Yeah. I think I passed you before and I'm like, I recognize them.